Hello there! The premise of this video is that I'm going to explain how the internet works. I have no script ready for this and I just started recording. So welcome to How Does the Internet Work by Endeavorance. Let's start with the start. You open up your web browser and navigate to your favorite website, probably endeavorance.camp. This is literally a common interview question in the tech field. So let's see, you typed in https://something.something. So let's start with that HTTP thing. HTTP is Hypertext Transfer Protocol, and the S just means secure. Let's not worry too much about what secure means. It just means secure. If you have an S, you're good. So your browser is like, okay, you want to use the Hypertext Transfer Protocol where? Okay, the domain that you put in. But what the hell is this domain? I don't know what that is. You typed in endeavorance.camp, but your computer doesn't know what endeavorance.camp is, so it reaches out across the network and it asks a DNS resolver. DNS is the domain name system. It basically is just saying, hey, someone typed in this URL, what server is that? Because endeavorance.camp is not a server, it's just a name that points to a server. Specifically, it's a domain name that points to a server. DNS. Found it, now what? Your web browser is going to send an HTTP GET request to that server, fetching that server's index.
What?
An HTTP request is just your browser's way of saying, I want this thing from this server. There are several different types of requests, including GET, POST, DELETE, PUT, and a bunch of other ones that don't matter. Let's focus on that first one, GET. An HTTP GET request is just your browser saying, hey server, give me this thing. I want to get this website. Give it. And so it reaches out to the server over the internet, and the server says, oh, I've received a GET request. Here's what I have for you. The server probably sends your computer back one of a few things. Most likely, it's going to be HTML, Hypertext Markup Language. So your browser, using the Hypertext Transfer Protocol, asked a server to give it some hypertext. What the hell is hypertext? Hypertext is the basis for basically the whole internet. It's the concept, right? It's having articles that have links to other articles and websites and pages and whatnot. It's just a method of representing rich text that can link out to other things. So you can have bold, italics, headings, bodies, images, links to everything else. That's hypertext. It's the web. So the server has sent you back some hypertext and your browser says, well, thank you. That's very kind of you. I'm going to render that now. And then your browser takes that and renders it out, and now you have a web page. That's it. That's how the internet works.
Psych! You thought that's everything? How many verbs did I say there was in HTTP?
Oh, you want to log into a website? How are you going to do that with GET? What up, Post? How we doing? Probably the second most used HTTP method is POST. POST is when a user sends data to a server. You are posting it. Posting it to the server. A POST request is when your browser bundles up some data and sends it along to a server and says, hey, my user wants to put this up on your server. This is used for a whole bunch of reasons and is often used for every reason that has anything to do with sending data to a server, when sometimes there's better ways to go about it, but for the large majority of purposes, POST is just how users send data to a server, including logging in. When you type your username and password into a field, it typically gets posted to the server and the server says, okay, I've either identified you or your password's wrong. If you authenticate it and the server's like, yeah, you're chill, then it just sends back an okay and you get logged in. It's more than that, but I can't get into all that. So let's say you're on another wonderful website like astral.camp, the Mastodon instance that I run. If you wanted to post a status, that would be a post. Get it? Your browser says, well, my client just typed something into the input box and hit publish. I have a bunch of data, I'm gonna post it to that server. The server says, thanks for the posted data. I have done stuff with it, you may now render it. What a nice server. But Endeavorance, how come sometimes when I do stuff on a website, it refreshes the page, and other times it doesn't refresh the page, and yet content changes on the page? Ajax, baby! Kind of. It's Ajax and Fetch and WebSockets and a few other things, but Ajax, baby! Ajax, which is not the cleaning product, stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. Without getting too deep into the extremely boring details, it's essentially just a way for your browser to do stuff on your behalf in the background, modifying data, making GET and POST and whatever other HTTP requests without the page having to refresh. The two most common ways that this happens are either an asynchronous request, one of those GET or POST requests happens in the background while you're on the web page and the web page updates without having to refresh. Or you're on a WebSocket. A WebSocket, to gloss over a lot, is basically just a constant connection between you and the server for real-time communication stuff. That's how things like chat apps work. Typically with a request, the client, your browser, has to reach out to a server and say, something happened, do a thing, please. But with a WebSocket, you are connected to the server, and the server can reach out to you and be like, hey, what's up, something happened. I'm telling you this so that you can do something. As you can imagine, that's very, very, very useful. We have our web browser connected to a server. We can send data, we can retrieve data, we can get real-time stuff from the server, and we can render all this rich text. Isn't that wonderful? But something horrifying lies underneath the surface. Cookies. Cookies and tracking and all that good stuff. You've almost certainly been prompted by a website to accept all their tracking cookies. What is that? Being as brief as possible, a cookie is essentially just a bit of data that when you make a request to a server, the server can say, hey, I want to store this data on the client. And your browser says, thanks, I'll remember that. And so now your browser has a bit of data on its end that a server can be like, oh, hey, it's you. That's essentially a cookie. There's also other ways of storing local data, which are increasingly much more preferred over cookies because cookies are kind of garbage, trash, dumpster fire. There are several different ways to store data locally. One of them is called local storage. Wow! Local storage is kind of chill because it's much more centered around the client instead of the server doing a bunch of nefarious crap to store data on your side. And you can go a little bit further than just local storage. Like your browser can have an entire database running in just the browser. Like, it's actually pretty cool, and that's how some of these offline apps work. You know those apps where like you can access them in a browser even when you're not on the internet? That's a thing, and it's really cool, and I'm not gonna get into it now. But then like, how does all the tracking stuff work, right? Like, we all know that we're being tracked constantly. Well, remember when I said AJAX and those asynchronous requests and the client being able to reach out on your behalf? Well, the way that tracking works is you get sent scripts, you get sent code that your browser is running, which typically is used just to keep the website interactive and make all those requests on your behalf to do things like logging in or whatever. But there's not really a difference between you going to your URL bar and saying, I want to go to endeavorance.camp, and some website saying, hey, I'm going to make a request on your behalf, back to a tracking server that posts some of your data to that tracking server. Here is where I will clarify that endeavorance.camp does not have any tracking at all on it, and none of my websites ever will. Now, tracking isn't all bad. A lot of modern apps will just do tracking to see how you're using it and figure out where the app is breaking and how they can actually make it better for you. It's in good faith sometimes. There's also a lot of other tracking that's just trying to figure out who you are so that they can sell you things better. And that's where that cookie stuff really comes in. Like, if you are logged in as a user and it's just the website sending usage data back to itself, that doesn't require a whole lot of nefarious stuff. But if you want to track somebody across multiple websites and build a profile on them, that's when you start doing the nefarious things with cookies, where you can track them across a bunch of different sites and get a sense of who they are. And sometimes, even if they block your cookies and block everything else, you can still do what's called fingerprinting to figure out who they are. Fingerprinting is when you look at the browser, you look at the person that's connected to your server, and you say, what are all the things that are not necessarily identifying information about them, but when I combine all these random things about them, I can get a pretty good sense of who they are. Specifically, the size of your browser, the version of your browser, what locale you're using, if you have any kind of identifiable location information available, what browser features do you have enabled or disabled, what operating system are you on, what device are you running on, is it Android or iOS, is it Mac or Windows? All of this can be used to create a semi-unique profile to say, oh, I think this is probably the same person that I've seen before. In fact, the Tor browser, which is one of the most private ways to access the internet, encourages you to not change the browser's default size, literally the window that appears on your screen. Because if everyone's using the default size, it becomes that much more difficult to separate out who is who. The internet is great. Anyway, I have to go do things now, but that's more or less how the internet works off the top of my head. I skipped over a whole bunch of stuff, and if you have any questions that you would like me to clarify, I'd be more than happy to answer them in the comments. So just go ahead and leave a comment below, and I'll be there. If you've made it this far, also please consider subscribing and drop a like on this video if you learned something. All that engagement helps me out greatly as I'm working to build up this channel. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Endeavorance. Take care, and be well.